I'm Sarah Wolff. I'm the director of the Center for European Research, and I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Politics at Queen Mary University of London. The Center for European Research is a hub for research and policy about European issues, and we engage with academics, with students, with citizens, and with policymakers about various topics on European integration, including the migration crisis or Brexit or challenges related to the Eurozone. I think we should treat the EU differently. It's not a region like any other, and there are several reasons for that. First, I think European integration has brought peace and stability for more than 70 years on the European continent. Second, it's a huge market with 500 million inhabitants, a single market that is very well integrated, and especially a freedom of movement for people, goods, services, and capital. It is also a region that is looked up by other regions of the world, and it promotes certain values and certain norms, such as democracy and human rights abroad. The migration crisis took place in the summer of 2015. About 1 million refugees and migrants arrived through the Mediterranean Sea to the European Union. They mostly landed with boats on the shores of Greece and Italy. About 1 million people arrived in 2015. Germany granted asylum to about 800,000 refugees in 2015, but we need to understand that this is relatively a small number of people compared to the global number of refugees. So globally, we have at present 65 million refugees worldwide. The European Union experienced and welcomed about 1 million people during the summer of 2015. Yet, because of this quantitative, if you want, influx, we have spoken about a crisis. I think the crisis has been much more a crisis of governance and a crisis that has challenged EU migration policies. The arrival of so many refugees and migrants has challenged the basic principles of solidarity and burden sharing amongst EU member states. It has challenged the basic principle of having a common and collective, if you want, EU migration policy. Basically, no one wanted to take the responsibility during the crisis. The situation in Greece and Italy at the time and still nowadays is quite difficult for refugees and migrants, in the sense that these countries do not have the capacity to provide good detention conditions, and basically have allowed, especially Italy, these migrants and refugees to basically continue their journey to other European countries. Next to Schengen, we have an important mechanism within the European Union, which is called the Dublin Convention. For the Dublin Convention, there was a system of what we used to call asylum shopping. So refugees would apply in Germany, their application might be rejected, then they would apply to France, and they would apply maybe to Ireland, let's say. Well, with the Dublin Convention, it is one single system where refugees have to apply in the first country they have arrived. Now, we know that Greece and Italy do not provide proper conditions, and actually the Dublin Convention has been suspended. Migration crisis was a challenge for several reasons. The first one is that it showed the inability of the Dublin Convention to provide decent conditions for refugees, and it also showed the inefficiency of the system, simply because Greece and Italy couldn't take on such a huge number of asylum seekers applicants. Another challenge that occurred is the issue of rescue at sea. Italy was the sole responsible member state for that operation. At some point they said, look, that's enough. We have spent €1 million per month on that military operation. We need to share the burden, and other EU member states need also to contribute. So that operation in a way was transferred to an institution, an agency that is in charge of border control within the European Union, called Frontex. This agency, unfortunately, at the time did not have the competence to rescue people at sea. It only had the competence to control and to do surveillance, basically patrolling the external borders of the European Union. One of the main measures that was rapidly taken during 2015, and that was really pushed by Jean-Claude Juncker, who is the president of the European Commission, is to reform that agency and to make sure that it would get a competence to rescue people at sea. Why? Because people were dying at sea. Okay, it's not only that people were crossing, but many of them didn't make it to the European Union. So there was this new narrative about a need for the European Union to save lives and to act as a humanitarian actor as well in the area of migration. The migration crisis is really an example of state sovereignty, and the neo-functionalist story has some difficulties to hold in that situation. There has been lots of progress when we look at the history of integration in the field of migration and asylum policies, definitely. But we see in recent years that member states managed to adapt to this integration, and even though you do have further European integration, they remain the gatekeepers. Frontex was created in 2004 but transformed as a European Border and Coast Guard Agency. This agency is far from being a supranational institution. It had, for many years, it was not able to buy its own equipment. And you still do not have an agency that has a single uniform, nor a supranational competence to really patrol EU external borders. The agency is only an agency that coordinates what the 28 member states, soon 27 member states, do on their external borders. And unfortunately, I think we are seeing a new type of integration, which is neither neo-functionalist, neither completely intergovernmental, but actually is a sort of adaptation of member states to supranational governance. They accept to have certain modes of decision making and an increased role of the European Parliament on certain issues, but member states are able to keep control of what they want to do. Just an example is operational cooperation in law enforcement is still a competence of the member states. It's not being supranationalized, and you also see a lot of initiatives in the field of migration where member states are able to bypass what the European Union is doing. So for instance, I give an example, readmission agreements. Readmission agreements are agreements that are being concluded between the EU and a third country in order to return irregular migrants. So those who do not make it as asylum seekers and have entered irregularly will be returned back to their home country. This requires negotiations with, let's say, a country like Morocco, for instance, or Turkey. And in fact, you see that EU member states do not use this EU readmission agreement, but prefer to use police cooperation agreement or memorandum of understanding, forms of agreements which are much more flexible than following the EU path. So it is a cumbersome process, and I think the migration crisis unfortunately has shown that we are far from having a supranational integration in the field of migration, especially irregular migration. We might have a different story if we look at progresses in the area of the rights of migrants and the rights of asylum seekers, where we see much more progress thanks to the European Commission and the European Parliament. but I'm afraid that in general, member states remain the gatekeeper, and that will remain so.